Okay, there you go.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to be responding to our teens claim of fact, which was animal experimentation for medical purposes has many benefits to society. His first secondary claim was that animal experimentation helps reduce human suffering. The second one was animal experimentation also benefits society, benefits animals, excuse me. And his third secondary claim was that development of most new drugs and cures for diseases can only be achieved through animal experimentation. In response to his first secondary claim, animal experimentation helps to reduce human suffering. There are a few challenges with the evidence. The evidence was sourced in the bibliography very well, but not so much in the speech. It kind of challenged the validity. The second piece of evidence was about smallpox, polio, and insulin, and how they were discovered through the use of animal testing. However, some of that was false. According to AR, which is animalrights.com, they found that smallpox was discovered in 1796 by Dr. Edward Jenner in the UK through the observation of milkmaids, so not through the actual animal. It was through the interaction with the animal, but not the testing was done on humans, and how milkmaids had the immunity to cowpox and smallpox. There were some challenges with the reasoning. It was okay, but there was no statistical evidence as far as how animal experimentation actually reduces suffering. It was very inferential. The counterclaim that I came up with was that the success of animal experimentation is limited by the number of medicinal side effects that significantly contribute to human suffering. The first questions I thought of were how many animal experiments produce beneficial results to humans, and how many products that are released today in society end up being harmful to humans. What I found was as many as half the drugs that have been approved in the US and the UK after animal testing have subsequently been withdrawn. An article in the Baltimore Sun by Kelly Overton, the executive director for People Protecting Animals, stated that 90% of medications approved for human use after animal testing later proved ineffective or harmful to humans in clinical trials. Animal-tested drugs have killed, disabled, or harmed millions of people and led to costly delays. In response to a secondary claim, number 2, animal experimentation also benefits animals. The evidence was pretty good. It was a little underdeveloped and confusing. The first part stated that every medicine given to animals is tested on them before, which basically means that no matter what, they are being tested on animals continuously, even though the one in the end might have the vaccination, which means there could have been animal suffering involved. The second piece of evidence from the organization Americans for Medical Progress was solid, but a little one-sided. The reasoning, therefore, was a little one-sided. It makes it difficult to support the claim that animal experimentation benefits animals, and it fails to play devil's advocate to look at how many animals died or suffered to help just one. My counterclaim was animal experimentation is harmful to animals. Dr. Thomas Dixon, professor at Churchill College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, stated that humans infect healthy animal test subjects in an attempt to discover a vaccine. Animals perfectly healthy before it's infected. Tom Reagan, professor of philosophy at North Carolina State University, stated that on animalrights.com that over 100 million animals are tested on each year worldwide, and animals being tested on are used as tools, and it actually causes breeders around the world to come up who basically breed animals solely for test purposes. That was by Tom Reagan. In response to secondary claim number 3, development of most new drugs and cures for diseases can only be achieved through animal experimentation. The evidence, again, was not cited throughout, and the statement 71 of 103 Nobel Prizes for medicine and physiology were as a result of animal testing was accurate, but it doesn't really support the claim at all. The reason behind the claim is justified by the evidence, and it states how animal testing is the only way to develop new medicines and drugs. My counterclaim is that development of most new drugs and cures for diseases can be achieved through other means besides animal testing. Kelly Overton again stated that the only effective way to discover cures is through the use of same species cells, tissues, and organs. And an article in avert.org, an international charity organization aimed at ending AIDS and HIV, said that studies have suggested that microdosing, where only a tiny amount of the product is given through the skin, could be a new and very effective alternative to animal experimentation. The National Institute of Health reported that more than 80 HIV/AIDS vaccines that have passed animal testing failed during clinical testing with humans. And then finally, the majority of medical schools in the U.S., including Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, have replaced their use of live animals in physiology and pharmacology with non-animal testing methods through computer software and other testing. Thank you.
All right, the structural issues were all fine. You laid out the secondary points pretty clearly. You had a challenge on the evidence right away. There's an argument about the application of the information on vaccines. Your illustration about the milkmaids, for instance, is interesting, but I'm not exactly sure that it undermines the conclusion that the advocate was making on this particular point, and it seemed a little bit abstract on that point. I think you do have an interesting criteria that you've suggested. I think you need a little bit more proof on that. The data that you have later on that suggests, for instance, about the amount of animal experimentation that gets used and the results that are beneficial for humans, I think kind of fits that criteria, and that would be a way of explaining it a little bit more clearly. There's a substantial amount of research that ends up being wasted despite the fact that it cleared on animal research that has no long-term human benefit, and so as the notion that it's necessary can largely be challenged on those grounds, and I think that's the way you want to explain that argument. On the second point, it sounded like you were doing a critique rather than a refutation of the argument, and more like you were evaluating the quality of the advocate's argument instead of analyzing whether or not it was sound or reasonable. I thought that you had some interesting information about the number of animals that are being used, but I didn't really hear any inference being drawn from that, and that's where I think you want to go back to that criteria that you had on the first point, and then what comes up later on in that third point about the number, in the example with the HIV and AIDS medications. I thought that would be a good way of putting those things together. There's a challenge to relevance on the Nobel Prize winners, but you don't really explain the challenge of relevance, and I think that you need to do that. You usually do a pretty good job citing information on your counterclaims. You do seem a little bit bored while you're giving the presentation. I think you need a little bit more energy. You're doing a little more reading than you want to. Talk to the audience a little bit more. Kind of put it in the context. You're focusing so much on getting technical stuff together without necessarily connecting to the audience. Here's why this matters, and you need that kind of internal summary. And I think at the end of the speech, for instance, it seemed like it was very abrupt. You finished quickly, and you could use a summary that tells us, given what I've said, here's how you're supposed to put these things together and reach the conclusion that I'm reaching. A point like that, I think, would help.